Guys, it's Bree here at Blossom and Branch Farm, and today I wanted to talk to you about growing my most favorite fragrant flower, which is stock. Let's go. Stock is one that I only started growing actually about 4 years ago. Started growing it because I love stock. The smell of it is peppery. It's kind of clove-like, and not only that, but it's beautiful. It has lots of ruffly layers. They are a little bit tricky. So let's start out with different varieties. When you are selecting a stock variety to grow, what do you want to be considering? Well, there are a couple main ones that you're going to be looking at for cut flowers. Those are primarily going to be iron and cat's varieties. So the iron variety tends to have stronger, thicker stems. It tends to be a little bit taller, and it also does better in warmer temperatures. On the other hand, the cat's variety is a little bit earlier blooming, and it has a little bit of a weaker stem. So some of this comes down to the type of climate that you are in. If you are in a very cold area, then you might be able to do better with the cat's variety. But here in Colorado, zone 5-6, we tend to heat up pretty rapidly in spring. So once we hit our last frost date, we can immediately be seeing temperatures up into the 80s and then even into the 90s in early June. We typically want to select one here that is going to be okay under warmer temperatures. So I prefer the iron variety. They have one stem per plant. That's pretty true of most stock varieties, is that it's one flower per seedling. So it's not like, for example, snapdragons, which we just did our video on, where if you pinch them, you get lots of different blooms. Not true with stock. You just let it grow, you get one. So for me, my choice, my favorite, and the ones that you'll be seeing when I show pictures and videos during this is going to be the iron variety. Colors kind of come down to what your personal preference is, so I'm not going to go too much into that, but I do like to do a lot of mixes, and that way I get a lot of different colors just from one seed packet. Now for seeding stock, we want to be avoiding direct seeding. Direct seeding really doesn't work too well for these stock varieties. So we're usually looking at starting these indoors about 10 weeks before our last frost. You could even do 12 to 14 weeks before your last frost, because what we do want to be doing is planting them out before last frost. So similar to the snapdragons, we'll probably be planting those out around 5 weeks before our last frost, give or take a week or two, depending on what's happening with snow or freezing temperatures or other weather anomalies that might be happening. So, but about 5 weeks before our last frost is when we're planting them out into the garden. And then we want them to be growing for about at least 7 weeks inside before transplant stage. So work back, that's at least like 11, 12 weeks, 10 on the loose end. So get that stock ordered. For seeding, you do want to cover these ones lightly, unlike snapdragons where you just want to surface sow them right on the top. For stock, we're actually going to cover them with about 1/4 of an inch of soil, so just a nice light sprinkle of seed starting soil over the tops of the seeds. They do like light for germination, so make sure you're keeping them nice and moist and under a light. Do not use a heat mat. Stock, just like snapdragons, are cool flowers. That means they like colder temperatures for growing on and for germination. You're shooting for between 65 and 75 at most, and oftentimes your heat mat is going to make your soil hotter than that. So if you're not sure, make sure you're using a heat mat that has a temperature regulator so that you can set it if you want to use one, or do what I do for my snapdragons. I just set my light nice and close to the top of the seed starting surface, and that way it gets a little bit of heat, but not too much that it's going to totally toast the seeds. Now, once we hit our leaf stage is when you are going to decide if you want to select your stock for doubles or singles. What does that mean? When stock flowers, it will either flower as a double or a single. A single tends to have looser petals, more spaced out along the stem of the plant. They are single petals. And then a double flowered plant, on the other hand, has more layers, it has more ruffles. So when you think of a typical stock flower, you're probably thinking and picturing a doubled flower. Now, that to say, you have to select that. They don't all bloom as doubles or all as singles. Most mixes have, about half and half will bloom singles and half will bloom doubles. So if you know you really want the doubles, this is where you're going to select for your single or your double blooming stock, is right at that first leaf stage. But how do we go about selecting for a double bloom or a single bloom? Okay, so sorry guys, I had to change locations because it is freezing. I had to get a little closer to the fire. First of all, do you even have to select for doubles and singles? You don't, and in fact, I really don't. I just plant them all. To me, it's not really worth selecting because then you basically lose half of your seeds. So I'll just include the singles in my bouquets alongside the doubles. They still have good scent. They're still pretty in their own way. So it is up to you whether you want to do this or not. But full disclaimer, I don't. Now, if you do want to select for doubles and you are soil blocking, I would recommend starting them in the mini soil blocks, because starting them in the mini soil blocks lets you start, again, a lot of them in a small amount of soil, and then you can just select out whichever ones you don't want to grow. If you are going to do selecting, I would also do 2 seeds per cell, so that even if one of them is a single and you decide to cut it and cull it out of your mix, then you can still hopefully have another one that might be a double. So your chances are better if you do 2 seeds in each cell. What I say is not the Bible, but what I do is I start them all in the minis, because I do start a lot of them, and then I just transplant them in from the mini soil blocks. But the minis, again, we've talked about this in our which soil block to pick if you're just starting out soil blocking. If you're just starting out, I would use that medium size, because they're not going to dry out as quickly as the mini soil blocks. Remember, I start 500 of these babies in the spring, so if you're not starting that many and you're a home gardener, do a regular size soil block, the one that makes 5 at once, okay? Let me know below if you have questions about that. Hopefully that was clear-ish. When you are selecting, if you do want to select for doubles and singles, there are a couple things you want to do. One is you're going to want to put your seedlings into the fridge. So what you need to do is you need to expose them to a period of cold around 40 degrees for about 3 days, and that's going to bring out these differences in the seedlings that will let you see a little bit better which ones are singles and which ones are doubles. So if you have a fridge that does not freeze, please don't put it in the coldest spot in your fridge, because then your seedlings can die if they freeze. Put them into your fridge. Yes, it will be dark. They won't really be growing in that time because it'll be cold. And then after day 3, you'll take them out, and then you're going to look at your seedlings. If you're looking for specifically for doubles, you're looking for ones that are actually lighter green, which is a little counterintuitive. You might be thinking those ones will be darker green. They'll be a little bit lighter green than the others. They have large oval-shaped leaves. And the singles, the ones that are going to be singles, are going to have fused leaves. So I'll show you what that looks like, but where the leaves are kind of fused together. And they'll also be darker green. They'll also be a little bit shorter, those singles. So again, if you're looking for doubles, you're looking for lighter green, oval-shaped leaves that are separate, fully separate from each other, and a little bit taller. And then for singles, you're looking for shorter ones that are darker green and even sometimes have those fused leaves that are fused together. So that's only if you're going to select for doubles or singles. If you don't really care, then just grow them all. It doesn't matter. If you are planting into our seed starting mix that uses the Fox Farms potting soil, probably unlikely that you're going to have to fertilize, but you could do a fertilize about 4 weeks into growing stage. So when your seedlings are about 4 weeks old, you could give them a fertilize of 1 teaspoon per gallon of fish emulsion, just to give them a little boost before you transplant them out. And now again, we're growing these ideally for about 6 weeks-ish, 6 to 7 weeks inside before transplanting out. And once you're transplanting them out, it's going to be still cold, so same rules apply as snapdragons. Only cover if you're going to be dropping below 15 or 20 degrees, but you do want to do a thorough hardening off. Make sure you start hardening them off when you're about week 5 or 6 of growing them as seedlings. Start to do that transition out. So depending on when you're going to be planting, at least give them a week, ideally even 10 days of time where you do an hour outside, an hour back in, 2 hours outside, and then back inside, 4 hours outside, back in, and then gradually expose them to those cooler nighttime temperatures too. That is going to be vital to their survival in case you do get another cold snap before your last frost date. So because we're planting them in before last frost, make sure you're thoroughly hardening them off so they can take that cold. And then you don't have to cover them unless it's going to drop below 15 degrees Fahrenheit. They're pretty hardy. Even if you're getting snow, don't cover them, just let the snow insulate them, they'll be fine. Now, as far as pinching, we already mentioned, no pinching for these guys, do not bother. And then in terms of netting, personally, I do not feel like mine necessarily need netting. If you're not sure, go ahead and net. We showed how to net in our Snapdragon video. You can use that same method. And that's only because those flowers can get a little bit top heavy. But again, if you're growing the iron variety, they have a nice, strong, sturdy stem. If you're getting them in before your last frost and you're growing that iron variety, in my opinion, you don't need netting. In terms of spacing, they can be pretty close together. So because there's only one stem and one flower per seedling, you can put them pretty close, maybe 4 to 6 inches apart is going to be plenty of space for stock. plant them indensely. That's also going to help with weed suppression. They are in the brassica family, and so I would definitely recommend making sure that you have a little bit of nitrogen in your soil, but you don't want to overload your plants with nitrogen, especially at the beginning of the growing season, because what can happen is if you overload your soil with nitrogen at the beginning of the growing season, your plants don't form the associations they need to with the soil. They get a little bit lazy, and they don't always form all the fungal associations and the bacterial associations with the soil life that they need to really thrive. So a little bit of nitrogen, but don't go overboard. You can go back and watch our alfalfa fertilizer recipe. I'll link it below. You could do an application of that alfalfa fertilizer before planting, or you could do a foliar application of some fish emulsion, the same one that I recommended for fertilizing your seedlings, maybe a week after planting. Do not over fertilize your stock, okay? Because if you do, they are prone to aphids. So stock are prone to a couple of pests. One is aphids, and that is especially true if you're over-fertilizing. That's true for all plants if you're over-fertilizing. That really quick green growth that happens with nitrogen fertilization is what attracts aphids. They love that. So if you don't want aphids, don't over-fertilize. Err on the side of under-fertilizing. So again, one alfalfa fertilizer application to the soil maybe a couple days before planting, and then nothing else unless you see problems would be my ideal fertilizing schedule for you. What about flea beetles? Flea beetles are the other pests that we tend to see a lot in stock, and very common also in snapdragons, interestingly. And there's one trap crop that I never see recommended that works really well for me, which is cleome, also called Rocky Mountain bee plant, and it's native here. And this is why I emphasize native plants. So if you can, a perimeter of native plants around your garden area is really going to help you with pest resistance in your garden overall. But what I found is that the flea beetles in particular love this Rocky Mountain bee plant or cleome. So when I plant it anywhere near my garden, all the flea beetles go there and they leave everything else alone, which is great, obviously. And then I also see the ladybugs come in and then they start to eat the flea beetles. It's all good. I always recommend, those types of interplanting beneficial native plant perimeters around your garden instead of using anything pesticide related. If your aphids get very bad, again, try not to fertilize too much, but if your aphids do get out of hand, you can always just spray them off with a high blast of water. Hold onto your stalk stem as you're doing it and just blast it with a hose, and usually that'll knock them right off, and then they're too small to get back on. They're not particularly a drought tolerant one. I wouldn't say. They will yellow if they don't get enough water, and they won't bloom as nicely. So definitely make sure that you're keeping them moist evenly. So mulching is going to be helpful, just like it was for our snapdragons. You could use some kind of leaves or some pine needle mulch. Any kind of organic matter mulch is going to be great. It'll also enrich your soil at the same time. Now, succession planting, some people recommend succession planting your stock every couple of weeks. For me, it's not really worth it because after our first flush, it just gets too hot for them to really thrive. If you're in a cooler climate that doesn't get temperatures up into the 90s and 100s in the summertime, then you could consider succession planting. If you're only hitting 80s and more temperate, then you might be able to get away with planting and growing stock on a succession schedule. But for me, I do one fall planting of stock. So I'll usually seed that in mid-June. Just for reference, my last frost usually is around mid-October. So I'll usually seed them mid to end of June. So around mid-August is when I'm transplanting them into the ground. And then they're blooming for me as we're heading into fall. So they kind of will bloom at the same time as some of our mums and some of our late dahlias. So if you're looking to succession and you're in a hot climate like me, kind of skip that mid-hot season of summer is what I'd recommend, and seed another one so that you can have it planted and blooming into fall. And then don't forget, stock are also edible plants. So there are lots of great recipes for things like putting stock flowers into your salads, which is always delicious. But for me, they are just a beautiful, perfect cut flower. You can expect about a week of vase life out of them. Make sure you're keeping that water nice and fresh and clean after you've harvested your stock. That's it for stock. I have another fun video coming up here in a couple days where we're talking about kind of current events and food versus flowers and what am I growing this year based on everything that's happening with our food supply. I for sure have a lot of concerns about what's going to be happening with costs and food prices this summer. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about how I'm tackling that in the garden and some things that I'm growing to try to battle that. So tune back in. Don't forget to subscribe and all those good things. I'll see you guys around here next time at the farm.